All right, everybody, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive.
Ready when you are.
Okay, so today we're wading into the world of local government.
Always a fascinating world.
We've got the minutes from count 'em, three Palo Alto City Council meetings from May 2024.
Buckle up, folks. 3 meetings worth of drama, intrigue.
Roundabout speeches.
Oh, definitely roundabout speeches.
Well, in that case, fewer car chases than I was hoping for, but I'm sure we'll uncover some excitement along the way. The big question we're always trying to answer is, what do these meetings tell us about what's really going on in a city?
Right. What are the priorities, the anxieties, the undercurrents that are driving the conversation? And to get to that, we got to set the scene a bit.
Okay, so what's the overall vibe of these meetings?
Well, if you're picturing a bunch of folks sitting around a table, politely sipping tea, and agreeing on everything.
Sounds lovely, but unlikely.
Yeah, not quite. The minutes themselves are pretty, official sounding. But even so, you can sense a certain tension. Like, remember that unity statement from Mayor Stone?
Oh yeah, the one where he basically pleads with everyone to just get along.
Exactly. That's usually a sign that things aren't exactly peachy behind the scenes.
So what's got everyone's knickers in a twist?
It's a mix of things. You've got the anxieties around the Israel-Palestine conflict spilling over into these meetings.
Right, because even in a place like Palo Alto, global events don't just stay on the sidelines.
Absolutely. And then you've got the ever-present worries about anti-Semitism, the environment. It's like this undercurrent of unease running through everything.
So it's not just local politics, it's like local politics in the age of global anxiety.
Perfectly put. And it's important to keep that in mind as we unpack these minutes, because it colors everything.
Noted. Now, for our listeners who've never had the pleasure of attending a Palo Alto City Council meeting, what are we dealing with here?
Well, picture your classic city council setup. You've got the 7 council members, each representing a different district.
Are elected officials the ones making the big decisions?
Right. And then you've got the city manager, kind of like the CEO of the city.
Keeping the trains running on time.
More or less. You've also got the city attorney, various department heads, and, crucially,
the public.
Yes, residents eager to make their voices heard. And they get their chance during public comment. It's like a little microcosm of democracy in action.
Because local government, in theory, is where your voice can actually have an impact. It's closer to the ground, right?
Exactly. And these public comment sections, they're fascinating. They give you a real window into what's keeping Palo Alto residents up at night.
All right, so we've got this backdrop of, global uncertainty, local anxieties. But life goes on. The city's business needs to get done, right? What were some of the big ticket items on the council's agenda that month?
Well, one thing that jumps out from the minutes is just the sheer volume of appointments.
Appointments, like who gets to be on what committee?
Exactly. We're talking Architectural Review Board, Human Relations Commission, all sorts of groups that most people probably don't even think about.
But they have their fingers on the pulse of what's actually happening in the city, right?
Yeah, big time. These commissions, they have a surprising amount of say in what gets built, how public spaces are designed, even how the city promotes things like diversity and inclusion. It's like the behind-the-scenes work of shaping a city's identity.
Fascinating. So, appointments check. What else?
Well, alongside those appointments, the big recurring theme, the one that always gets everyone fired up, is the budget.
Ah, yes, the budget. Every city council's favorite high-wire act.
Especially in a place like Palo Alto, right? Because you've got these competing pressures on the one hand, concerns about potential deficits. On the other hand, demands for more spending on things like affordable housing, support for unhoused residents.
Tough choices. It's like trying to balance a checkbook with everyone in town looking over your shoulder and offering opinions. So what were some of the big sticking points in these May meetings?
Well, one example that really highlights this tension is Councilmember Tanaka's repeated emphasis on fiscal responsibility.
Oh, I've heard that name. He's the one who's always sounding the alarm about spending, right?
That's the one. The minutes mention him pushing back against several proposed expenditures, even questioning the need for additional staff in certain departments.
Even in departments dealing with essential services.
Even then. He even suggested maybe they should look into lowering salaries for employees who work from home.
Wow, okay, so he's really drawing a line in the sand there.
He's definitely not afraid to ruffle some feathers.
Eh.
But the interesting thing is, it's not like he's a lone voice in the wilderness. You can sense this undercurrent of fiscal conservatism in other council members' comments too, especially when it comes to big-ticket items.
So it's not necessarily about, like, we need less money for paper clips, it's more about a fundamental philosophy towards spending.
Exactly. And this philosophy, it plays out in how they approach things like the local advanced water purification system,
Hmm.
that big project to make the city less reliant on outside water sources.
Right, which seems pretty crucial these days, with climate change making droughts more common and all.
Exactly. But even for a project that essential, the price tag is, well, let's just say it's not insignificant. And while most council members seem to agree it's a worthy investment, you can tell they're relieved that a good chunk of the funding is coming from outside sources.
Ah, yes, the magical money tree of state and federal grants. Makes those tough decisions a little easier. So, water purification check. Anything else that got people riled up?
Oh, most definitely. Remember that ongoing saga of the 800 San Antonio Road redevelopment project? That one's still dragging on, and it's causing all sorts of drama.
Remind me, what's the deal with that one again?
So the basic idea is to demolish an existing building and put up a mixed-use development with housing, shops, that sort of thing. The goal is to address the housing shortage, which, as you can imagine, is a pretty big deal in Palo Alto.
Right, because even tech millionaires need a place to rest their heads at night.
Exactly. But here's the catch. Even in a city desperate for housing, residents can get very, shall we say, particular about development projects. And the minutes from these meetings, well, let's just say they're full of concerns, worries about traffic, shadows, the impact on the character of the neighborhood.
It's the classic NMB dilemma, not in my backyard. Even if it means the backyard next door is overflowing.
And the council is stuck in the middle, trying to balance these competing interests. But even with all the local drama, remember that undercurrent of global anxiety we talked about earlier? Well, that really bubbles to the surface when the topic of the Israel-Palestine conflict comes up.
Ah, yes, because you can't escape the headlines, even in a city council meeting.
And it gets pretty heated, too, with residents sharing personal stories, expressing fears about rising anti-Semitism.
It's a reminder that local politics can sometimes feel very global indeed. So how did the council respond to this outpouring of, well, everything?
That, my friend, is where things get very interesting.
So we've got residents pouring their hearts out about a conflict happening thousands of miles away, anxieties about global trends hitting close to home. How does a city council even begin to handle that kind of emotional intensity?
It's tricky, right? Because on the one hand, you've got the council members who feel this responsibility to speak out against injustice wherever it's happening.
Because saying nothing can sometimes feel like taking sides.
Exactly. And you can sense that moral conviction in some of the public comments, this idea that silence equals complicity. But then, on the other side of the table, you've got council members urging caution.
Like, hey, let's stick to what we can actually control. Potholes, permits, that sort of thing.
Right. Because wading into international conflicts can start to feel like overreach, and it risks alienating parts of the community.
It's the classic stay in your lane versus speak truth to power dilemma. So which way did the Palo Alto Council lean on this one?
Well, in this particular case, no specific action was taken. But this debate about the council's role, how far their reach should be, well, it kind of tees up our next big topic. The whole push to directly elect the mayor of Palo Alto.
Ah, yes, the main event. This is where things get really interesting because we're not just talking about, like, bike lanes anymore. We're talking about the very structure of city government.
Exactly. It's about who has power and how they get it.
Mhm.
See, right now, the mayor's basically chosen by their fellow council members.
Kind of like first among equals.
Right. But this amendment, it was all about letting residents directly vote for their mayor.
Power to the people. So what were the arguments in favor of making that switch?
Well, folks in favor of a directly elected mayor, they argued it would give the mayor a stronger mandate, make them more accountable to the voters, not just the other folks on the council.
Because right now, it's kind of like being chosen for team captain by the other players, right? A popularity contest, but only among a very select group.
Exactly. Plus, proponents argued a directly elected mayor, especially if they had a longer term, would provide more consistent leadership, which matters, especially for regional stuff, where Palo Alto needs to work with other cities.
So a more unified voice for Palo Alto on the bigger stage. Makes sense. But I'm guessing not everyone was thrilled about this idea. What were the concerns from the if it ain't broke camp?
Well, several council members, Vice Mayor Lowing being one of them, they questioned the need for such a drastic change.
Hmm.
They argued the current system works, that having the council choose a mayor from their own ranks ensures someone with experience gets the job.
So it's about continuity, a deep understanding of the issues, less about shaking things up just for the sake of it.
Right. And then there were the concerns about the potential downsides of a directly elected mayor. Like, what happens when big money and outside interests inevitably come knocking during a mayoral campaign?
It's the classic dilemma, right?
Mhm.
More direct democracy, but also more potential for those with the deepest pockets to drown out everyone else's voice. Okay, so we've got this clash of visions, this battle of ideas. What happened?
Well, the minutes for these meetings, honestly, they read like a political thriller. Passionate speeches, last-minute amendments, you could practically feel the tension. But in the end, after all that back and forth, they ultimately decided to table the issue.
The good old-fashioned punt. So no dramatic power shift this time around. But what a fascinating window into the messy reality of local government. We've got budgets, we've got global anxieties, we've got the very structure of power being debated.
And it all comes back to this idea we keep circling. What does it mean to be a responsible citizen, especially in a world where the local and the global are constantly bumping up against each other?
Right. Because it's easy to feel powerless in the face of these huge, complex problems. But these meetings, they're a reminder that change, even on a global scale, starts with those small local conversations. So to our listeners, the next time you're scrolling through the news feeling overwhelmed, maybe take a look at what's happening in your own backyard.
Attend a city council meeting, voice your concerns, get involved. You might be surprised by what you learn, and who knows, you might even make a difference.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the big questions. What role should local governments play in tackling global issues? How do we balance competing needs and priorities in an increasingly complex world? And perhaps, most importantly, where can you get a decent burrito in this town? Until next time, folks, thanks for joining us on another Deep Dive.